Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. The raids come after dozens of Palestinians staged protests against the occupying forces along the border fence. India has reported 941 COVID-19 deaths overnight, taking the country's toll to nearly 51,000. Meanwhile, Brazil has registered 620 fatalities and over 23,000 infections in a day. In Pakistan, 7 people have died and 488 tested positive in the past 24 hours, while more than 269,000 have recovered so far. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 21.6 million people and claimed more than 774,000 lives. Belarusian leading opposition politician Sviatlana says she is ready to lead the country amid protests over alleged rigging in the presidential elections. In a video address, she urged security and law enforcement officers to switch sides from President Alexander Lukashenko's government. Meanwhile, the UK has rejected Belarus election results, saying it was fraudulent. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has delayed the general elections by 4 weeks to October 17 after a new coronavirus outbreak. Speaking at a news conference in Wellington, Ardern said the delay will give sufficient time for parties to plan campaigns accordingly. The Japanese economy has shrunk at its fastest rate on record as country fights to control the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's third largest economy shrank an annualized 27.8% during April to June from the previous quarter. Japan is already struggling with the low economic growth even before the pandemic. And in snooker, Ronnie O'Sullivan has claimed his 6th World Championship title with a dominant 18-8 victory over Kyron Wilson at the Sheffield's Crucible Theatre. O'Sullivan draws levelled with Ray Reardon and Steve Davis on World Crown. O'Sullivan has collected £500,000 in prize money, moving back up to second in the world behind last year's champion Jude Trump. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now for the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from Israel, which says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. The raids come after dozens of Palestinians staged protests against the occupying forces along the border fence. No casualties have been reported from the raid so far. Meanwhile, Israeli forces also shot and wounded a Palestinian in Bethlehem. The Defense Ministry says the forces opened fire near Rashel's tomb in the city. Israeli strikes on Palestine have accelerated since the signing of peace agreements with the United Arab Emirates last week. Moreover, Israel says it will sign a deal to start normalizing ties with Sudan in the near future. The Israeli intelligence minister said the pact with Sudan is expected to be signed before the new year. Ali Cohen said Bahrain and Oman could also be the next Gulf countries to follow the United Arab Emirates in formalizing ties with Israel. The UAE is the first Gulf state and third Arab nation to establish full diplomatic ties with Israel after Egypt and Jordan. Despite reports that the deal halted Israeli annexation of the West Bank, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the seizure plans are not off the table. Palestinian groups denounced the deal, saying it does nothing to serve the Palestinian cause and ignores their rights. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates has summoned Iran's ambassador in Abu Dhabi in response to a speech by President Hassan Rouhani. This comes after Rouhani said the UAE made a huge mistake by signing an agreement with Israel and called it a betrayal by the Gulf state. In a statement, state media said the UAE's foreign ministry called Rouhani's speech unacceptable and inflammatory. It said the remarks by Iran's president can lead to serious repercussions for the Gulf region's security. The UAE statement said the ministry considers Rouhani's speech interference in the country's internal affairs and an assault on its sovereignty. Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the six-member Gulf Cooperation Council has also condemned Iran's remarks towards the UAE over the accord with Israel. There has been no response from Tehran yet. Now, Iraq says a Katyusha rocket has struck Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone, which houses foreign missions, including the U.S. consulate. The military said the rocket was fired from an abandoned military base in southeastern Baghdad. It said there were no significant losses. The military added Iraqi security forces seized two other rockets at the launch site. The attack was at least the ninth within a week, which was apparently aimed at U.S. interests in Iraq. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Moving on, Brazil has registered 620 deaths from COVID-19 and over 23,000 infections in the past 24 hours. While in the US, more than 170,000 people have lost their lives to the virus, with over 5.4 million confirmed cases. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 21.6 million people and claimed more than 775,000 lives. This report has more details.
With thousands of deaths and infections every day, the coronavirus continues to overwhelm healthcare systems across the world. In the U.S., top infection disease expert Anthony Fauci says any attempt to attain herd immunity will result in massive death tolls in the country. Despite reporting the second highest death toll and infection tally in the region, Mexico says a vaccine can be made available by the first quarter of 2021. Brazilian First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro has tested negative for the virus after testing positive 2 weeks prior. While down under, Australia reported its deadliest day of the pandemic with 25 fatalities in the past 24 hours.
We've got a common challenge here, and whilst there is a trend that is positive, today's a very sad day for 25 families, and this is a long way from over.
In Europe, the second wave is surging in many countries, including Germany and France. Meanwhile, in Spain, thousands took to the streets to protest against the mandatory use of face masks in public spaces.
I'm here because there are too many repressive measures. They are taking all our rights away from us. In my opinion, the face mask should have been used during the pandemic, but not now.
In Asia, mainland China reported 22 new cases of the virus in the past 24 hours, while in South Korea, 197 fresh cases were registered. Meanwhile, Malaysia has detected a mutation of the COVID-19 virus in the country.
Meanwhile, in India, the deaths from COVID-19 have neared 51,000 as the country reported 941 deaths in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says 57,982 new cases were recorded overnight, taking the country's caseload over 2.6 million. It said there are still over 676,000 active cases in the country. The ministry said the two states, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, make up 40% of all the confirmed cases. India is the third worst hit country from the coronavirus after the US and Brazil. Meanwhile, Pakistan is witnessing a downward trend in the new COVID-19 cases as health experts believe in the country's promising survival rate. The Health Ministry said over 90% of the patients have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said 7 people have died, while 488 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,175, while the infections are over 289,000. The ministry said the number of active cases has reduced to over 13,000. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 126,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 95,000 cases. Moving on to New Zealand, where Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has delayed the general elections till October 17th after a second wave of COVID-19. Speaking at a news conference in Wellington, Ardern said the 4 weeks delay will give sufficient time for parties to plan campaigns accordingly. She said these decisions are still subject to scrutiny by the Parliament. Ardern says she had absolutely no intention of allowing any further delays to the vote. She said the postponement will also help the Election Commission finalise results.
I have decided on balance to move the election by 4 weeks to the 17th of October. At the end of last week, I was advised that this date is achievable and presents no greater risk than had we retained the status quo. I've also been advised that in moving to a 17 October election day, the Commission will be able to leverage and draw on much of the work already undertaken to deliver the election.
Well, the opposition parties had sought a delay after the outbreak prompted the government last week to put Auckland under a 2-week lockdown. Now, moving on to the Belarusian state, which is leading the opposition politicians, Svetlana says she is ready to lead Belarus amid protests against alleged rigging in the presidential election. Her statement comes after tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the Belarusian capital Minsk against President Alexander Lukashenko. More details in this report.
Belarus is navigating one of the biggest political crises in its post-Soviet history after the opposition rejected official results of the presidential election. In a video address, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya urged security and law enforcement officers to switch sides from President Alexander Lukashenko's government.
I'm prepared to take responsibility and act as the nation's leader during this period so the country settles down and gets back to normality, so that we can release all political prisoners and prepare a legal framework and conditions to hold another round of presidential elections in the shortest time possible. Genuine, fair and transparent elections that will be accepted without question by the international community.
Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, speaking at a rally of his supporters in Minsk, rejected calls to hold a new president election. He called the opponents as rats and urged his supporters to defend their country and independence. President Lukashenko also accused NATO of massing on his country's western border, which the alliance has dismissed, saying it is closely monitoring the situation in the country.
NATO tanks and jets are on standby within 15 minutes reach of our borders. This is not for nothing. NATO forces are rattling tank tracks at our doors. Military power is building up on the western border of our country. Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and unfortunately our brother Ukraine, its leadership are telling us to hold a new election.
Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron tweeted the European Union should support peaceful demonstrations in Belarus. German Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister Olaf Scholz described the Belarusian leader as a dictator. He warned Moscow against intervening to keep Lukashenko in power. The UK has also rejected Belarus's election results, saying it was fraudulent.
More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. In Somalia, at least 16 people have been killed and over a dozen others injured in a gun and bomb attack by Al-Shabaab militants on a beachfront hotel in the capital Mogadishu. The Information Ministry said security forces ended the 4-hour-long siege after killing the last attacker. It said special forces rescued 205 people, including the hotel owner and government officials. A government spokesperson said 5 of the people were killed were the attackers, while 1 police officer was killed in the rescue operation. Earlier, Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack in a statement posted online. In Colombia, 8 people have been shot dead by unknown gunmen in a drug trafficking area in the Nariño province near the border with Ecuador. Police said attackers wore balaclavas to cover their faces and carried long-range weapons. Colombian President Ivan Duque has condemned the attack. He blamed it on the presence of militias and drug trafficking groups in the area. He said 2 arrests have been made and these facts will be clarified later. Now, 4 people have been killed while 14 others wounded in a spat of shootings across the American city of Cincinnati. The bloodshed began at midnight after 3 people were shot in the Walnut Hills neighborhood. Police also responded to 2 other shooting reports in the Avondale area and the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood during the night. Police did not provide details about the 4th fatal shooting but confirmed that it occurred on the city's west end. They said the shootings seemed to be separate incidents but horrific and tragic. No suspect information has been made available by the police in any of the cases. Now, in the US, firefighters have scrambled to protect thousands of homes from a wildfire racing through bush-covered mountains north of Los Angeles. The wildfire has forced hundreds of evacuations and burned dozens of structures in the city. The blaze, dubbed the Lake Fire, has already destroyed 15,000 acres after erupting last week in the Angeles National Forest. According to local media reports, the fire is 12% contained. Moving on, 63 people have died so far from torrential rains and floods in Sudan since July, with thousands more forced to flee their homes. The Interior Ministry said over 14,000 homes and 119 public buildings were destroyed. Heavy rains usually fall in Sudan from June to October, and it faces severe flooding every year. The UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs estimates that over 185,000 people have been affected by the floods, with more rainfall expected in coming months. The OCHA said 17 out of 18 states across the country have been affected by flooding and landslides. The states of GAZA and Kassala remain the most affected in the east of the North African country. China has awarded the country's first COVID-19 vaccine patent to CanSino Biologics. State media said it is the first COVID-19 vaccine patent granted by China. It said the patent for the virus vaccine was issued on August 11th. CanSino said it is also in talks with Russia, Brazil and Chile to launch phase 3 trials in those countries. CanSino's Hong Kong shares rose around 14% and its Shanghai shares rose by 6.6% following the announcement. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia said it plans to begin phase 3 of the clinical trials for the CanSino vaccine this month. In southwest China, the world's oldest panda in captivity celebrated its 38th birthday in the zoo of Chongqing municipality. Her age is comparable to a human age of about 110 to 140 years old. More details in this report.
Xinjing, the giant panda, is celebrating her birthday at a zoo in China. She is among less than the 30 pandas in captivity that have an age of over 30. Many local residents and fans came to the zoo to jointly make a big cake out of various fruits and bamboo shoots and leaves and sing birthday songs. Despite her great age, Xinjing maintained a good body with her weight controlled at 95 to 100 kgs. The Chongqing Zoo specially made a recipe for her age to let her have more meals a day but less food at each.
We have 3 to 4 staff members taking care of her, and other staff offer help at any time. We usually cut bamboo leaves into pieces before feeding her. We want to maintain Xinjing's weight at a suitable level so as to prevent such diseases as obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol and high blood sugar, among others.
Chongqing is known as an oven city during summer. To fend off the summer heat, zoo staff only let Xinjing go outside the panda house in the morning or evening.
We have built a pond outdoors so that she can swim in it. We also often prepare cooling foods for her to eat, such as watermelons.
Xinjing has given birth to 10 baby pandas so far. As of the end of 2019, she had 153 descendants who live in more than 20 countries and regions, including Canada, America, Japan and China's Taiwan, Hong Kong and Shanghai.
Now, the Japanese economy has shrunk at its fastest rate on record as the country fights to control the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's third largest economy shrank an annualized 27.8% during April to June from the previous quarter. Japan saw its gross domestic product fall by 7.8% in the second quarter. This slump marks the biggest decline for Japan's economy since comparable data became available in 1980. One of the main factors behind the slump was a severe decrease in domestic consumption, which accounts for more than half of Japan's economy. Exports also fell sharply as global trade took a hit by the pandemic.
We declared a state of emergency in April and May, when it was weighed heavily for the April to June quarter. We have artificially stopped economic activities, so this tough result comes from that impact.
Well, Japan was already struggling with the low economic growth before the pandemic. Now, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says remittances to the country in July reached the highest ever recorded in a month. Khan said the payments were recorded at $2.768 billion last month. He said 12.2% increase was recorded over June 2020 and 36.5% increase over July 2019. Khan called the development positive for Pakistan's economy. The central bank attributed the increase to an orderly exchange rate and lowered remittance transaction threshold. European markets are trading mixed with geopolitical tensions and concerns over the spread of the virus on investors' radar. But investors are closely following escalating Sino-US tensions that are weighing on investor sentiment. Frankfurt's DAX has gained nearly 0.5%, while CAC 40 in Paris is trading up a fraction. London's FTSE 100 has gained close to 0.5%. In Asia, mainland Chinese stocks were higher on the day. The Shanghai Composite jumped 2.34%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 0.65%. Japan's Nikkei 225 slipped 0.83%. Shares in Australia declined, with the S&P ASX 200 down 0.81%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained over 0.5%. Now in snooker, Ronnie O'Sullivan has claimed his 6th World Championship title with a dominant 18-8 victory over Karen Wilson at the Sheffield's Crucible Theatre. O'Sullivan draws level with Ray Reardon and Steve Davis on world crowns. He has also surpassed Stephen Hendry on the all-time list of ranking events wins with a record 37 titles. Despite fighting back-to-back 7 frames against O'Sullivan, Ten Wilson lost the momentum to hand over the victory to the Brit. O'Sullivan collects £500,000 in prize money, moving back up to 2nd in the world behind last year's champion, Joe Trump. It was the biggest winning margin in a final since 2008, when O'Sullivan defeated Early Carter by the same scoreline. In golf, American Jim Herman has won the PGA WYNDHAM Championship at Sheffield Country Club. Herman finished the final day at 21 under par, beating fellow American Billy Horschel. Herman capped off a superb weekend of play with a win, shooting a 7 under par 63 in the final round. He fired 2 birdies and an eagle in the first 5 holes of the final round. Runner-up Billy Horschel, who carded a 5 under par 65, saw victory slip through his fingers after bogeying at 16. South Korea's Kim Si-woo finished tied for 3rd at ND 18 under after carding an event par 70 along with American Kevin Kishner. In cricket, the play-off final day of the 2nd Test match between Pakistan and England has been delayed due to wet field. The Met experts have also hinted another day of complete washout. Yesterday, the hosts scored 7 runs at the loss of 1 wicket before rain halted play. Pakistan's pacer Shaheen Shah got an early breakthrough for the guests after sending Rory Burns back to the pavilion for a duck. Earlier, Pakistan were bowled out for 236 in their first innings. Mohammad Rizwan top scored with 72 runs. England lead the 3-match series 1-0. In football, Sevilla have reached the final of the Europa League after beating Manchester United by 2-1 in Cologne. Sevilla striker Luke de Jong scored the winning goal in the 78th minute. Manchester United's Bruno Fernandes opened the scoring line with a 9th-minute penalty. But Suso scored an equaliser for Sevilla with a close-range strike. De Jong's winner came in late in the game to book a final spot for the Spanish side. Sevilla will meet the winners of tonight's clash between Inter Milan and Shakhtar Donetsk. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.